r/ProRevenge principal said, "Be grateful we fed you," so I destroyed their career. The fork froze halfway to my mouth when Principal Morrison's voice boomed across the cafeteria like a gunshot. "Excuse me, Mr. Chen." Every conversation died. 300 students turned to stare as Morrison's polished dress shoes clicked against the linoleum, each step echoing in the sudden silence. I set down my fork, the mac and cheese suddenly tasting like cardboard in my mouth. "Did I just see you go through the lunch line twice?" Her voice carried that particular brand of authority that made freshmen wet themselves. At 50-something, Patricia Morrison ruled Lincoln High like her own personal kingdom, complete with her perfectly styled blonde bob and designer suits that probably cost more than my family's monthly grocery budget. Yes ma'am. My voice cracked like I was 13 again. I was still hungry after. Still hungry. She let out a laugh that had zero humor in it. "You do realize that meal was completely free, don't you? Paid for by hard-working taxpayers." The cafeteria had gone so quiet you could hear the kitchen staff's whispers from 50 feet away. My best friend Jake shot me a sympathetic look from 2 tables over, but even he wasn't stupid enough to get between Morrison and her prey. Heat crept up my neck. "Yes ma'am, I know. I just thought maybe since there were extras." "Extras?" Morrison's voice pitched higher, ensuring even the kids in the far corner could hear every word. "Let me explain something to you, young man. This free lunch program isn't a buffet. It's charity. Charity. You get 1 meal, 1 milk, 1 fruit. That's it." She paused, scanning the sea of faces watching us like we were the day's entertainment. Some kids looked uncomfortable, but others were smirking. "Enjoying the show. You should be grateful we even fed you at all," Morrison continued, her voice dripping with disgust. "Some of us work hard for our money instead of expecting handouts." The words hit like a physical slap. My mom worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and stocking shelves at the grocery store during the day. She hadn't slept more than 5 consecutive hours in 3 years. My dad had been laid off from the factory 8 months ago and was killing himself trying to find work. They weren't expecting handouts. They were drowning. But I couldn't say any of that. Not with 300 pairs of eyes watching. Not with Morrison standing there in her $200 shoes, waiting for me to break. "I understand," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Good." She smoothed down her suit jacket with satisfaction. "Now throw away that second tray and get back to class. And Mr. Chin, don't let me catch you being greedy again." She walked away, her heels clicking triumphantly across the floor. Conversation slowly resumed, but the damage was done. I could feel the stares, hear the whispered comments. Jake mouthed, "What a bitch," but that didn't help the burning shame spreading through my chest. I grabbed both trays and walked to the trash can on shaking legs. A full meal, perfectly good food, went straight into the garbage while Morrison watched from the cafeteria entrance, making sure I followed through. As I dumped the untouched pizza and fruit cup, something cold and hard settled in my stomach. It wasn't hunger anymore. It was something else entirely. Principal Patricia Morrison had just made the biggest mistake of her career. She'd humiliated the wrong kid. The rest of that day passed in a blur of humiliation. Word spreads fast in a school of 1,200 kids, and by 6th period, I'd heard 3 different versions of my cafeteria encounter. In Jessica Martinez's telling, I'd apparently begged Morrison for more food. In the version circulating among the football team, I'd cried. I hadn't cried. But I wanted to. Walking home, I kept replaying Morrison's words. "You should be grateful we even fed you at all." Like I was some stray dog she'd thrown scraps to. Like my mom hadn't filled out form after form, providing tax returns and pay stubs to prove we qualified for assistance. Like we hadn't already sacrificed every ounce of pride we had left. Our apartment sat above Chen's Golden Dragon, the Chinese restaurant my uncle ran with skeleton staff and prayers. The smell of grease and soy sauce had long since stopped being comforting. Now it just reminded me of how the other kids sometimes called me egg roll when they thought I couldn't hear. Mom was asleep on the couch when I walked in, still wearing her blue grocery store vest. Her shift started at 4 a.m. I grabbed a blanket from her room and covered her up, trying not to look at the stack of bills on the coffee table. Past due notices had a particular shade of red that made my stomach clench. In my room, I fired up our ancient laptop, a hand-me-down from my cousin that took 5 minutes to boot up. I told myself I was just doing homework, but my fingers kept drifting to Facebook. Sure enough, someone had already posted about the cafeteria incident. 12 comments, mostly laughing emojis. Chen got destroyed by Morrison today, face with tears of joy. Maybe don't be so greedy next time, lol. My mom says poor people always want something for nothing. I slammed the laptop shut so hard the screen wobbled. That night at dinner, ramen noodles with an egg cracked into it, our usual Tuesday feast, Dad mentioned he'd had another interview at the auto parts store downtown. His voice carried that forced optimism that fooled exactly nobody. Manager seemed real interested, he said, though the rejection letter was probably already in the mail. Said they'd call by Friday. Mom nodded and smiled, playing along with the charade. This was what we did now. Pretended we weren't drowning. Pretended Dad wasn't checking every job board within 50 miles twice a day. Pretended I couldn't hear Mom crying in the bathroom sometimes when she thought I was asleep. "How was school, honey?" Mom asked, and I almost laughed. "How was school?" "Well, your son got publicly humiliated for being poor, but thanks for asking." "Fine," I said instead. "Just the usual." Later, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, Morrison's voice echoed in my head. That tone of pure disgust, like my poverty, was a personal insult to her existence. The way she made sure everyone heard. The satisfaction in her voice when she forced me to throw away perfectly good food. I'd always been good at math, good at seeing patterns. It came naturally, like a superpower I'd never found a use for. But lying there in the dark, something nagged at me. Something about the whole free lunch program that didn't add up. Morrison acted like feeding poor kids was bankrupting the school. But Lincoln High had over 400 students on free lunch. That was federal money, serious money. Enough to keep kids fed without anyone going hungry. So why was she so concerned about one extra helping? I sat up, that cold feeling from earlier returning stronger than before. Something wasn't right here. And I was going to figure out exactly what. The next morning, I arrived at school 30 minutes early with a plan. If Morrison wanted to make my poverty her business, then her business was about to become mine. I started in the most obvious place, the cafeteria. Mrs. Rodriguez, the head lunch lady, had always been kind to me. She was the one who sometimes slipped an extra roll onto my tray when no one was looking, the one who pretended not to notice when I lingered near the kitchen helping clean tables just to be around the smell of food. "Mijo, you're here early," she said, looking up from prep work. Her hair was already covered by a net, her hands busy chopping vegetables that actually looked fresh and appealing, nothing like the gray slop we usually got served. "Yeah, I wanted to ask you something." I glanced around to make sure we were alone. "Yesterday, when Principal Morrison got mad about me getting seconds, how much trouble does that cause? Like, financially?" Mrs. Rodriguez's knife paused mid-chop. "Trouble? What do you mean?" "I mean, does it mess up budgets or anything?" She acted like that one extra serving was going to bankrupt the school. Something shifted in Mrs. Rodriguez's expression. She set down her knife and really looked at me for the first time. "Danny, can I tell you something? But you didn't hear it from me, okay?" My pulse quickened. "Okay. We throw away enough food every day to feed another 100 kids," she whispered. "Good food too. The federal program gives us money for quality ingredients, fresh vegetables, real meat. But somehow..." She gestured around the kitchen. "Look at what we actually serve." I followed her gaze to the industrial-sized cans of processed cheese sauce, the frozen pizza squares that tasted like cardboard, the bruised apples that were more brown than red. This wasn't the fresh food I'd seen her prepping. Where does the good food go? Mrs. Rodriguez looked nervous now, wringing her hands on her apron. "I shouldn't say anything. I need this job, Mijo. I have grandchildren to feed. Please," I pressed. "Something isn't right here, is it?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. "Then, every Tuesday and Friday, a catering truck picks up supplies from our kitchen. Morrison says it's for administrative events and school board functions. But Danny, we get enough fresh food delivered to feed an army, and you kids get this." She gestured helplessly at the processed garbage. My mind raced. How long has this been happening? 2 years now. Ever since Morrison took over the lunch program budget. Mrs. Rodriguez grabbed my arm suddenly. "But you cannot tell anyone I said this. Promise me." "I promise," I lied. The bell rang, signaling 15 minutes until first period. I thanked Mrs. Rodriguez and headed for the administrative office, my heart pounding with something that might have been excitement. The office was already buzzing with activity. Mrs. Patterson, the secretary, was juggling 3 phone calls while sorting through a mountain of paperwork. But what caught my attention was the bulletin board behind her desk, covered in invoices, delivery schedules, and budget reports that were supposed to be confidential. I pretended to wait for attendance slips while scanning the documents. Most were too far away to read clearly, but one invoice was turned at just the right angle. Morrison Catering Solutions, $3,847, weekly administrative services. Morrison Catering Solutions. The principal had her own catering company. And it was billing the school district nearly $4,000 every week. I walked to first period in a daze, Mrs. Rodriguez's words echoing in my head. Good food coming in, garbage going to students, and Morrison's personal catering company getting paid almost $4,000 weekly for administrative services. The math was starting to add up, and the sum made my stomach turn. Morrison wasn't just cruel. She was stealing food directly from the mouths of hungry kids. The rest of the week, I became a different person. Where I used to keep my head down and shuffle between classes, now I moved through the halls with purpose. I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before, delivery schedules, staff conversations, the way Morrison's office always smelled like expensive perfume and fresh flowers while the rest of the school reeked of industrial cleaner and defeat. Friday morning, I positioned myself near the loading dock during my study hall. Mrs. Chen, no relation, despite sharing a last name, never took attendance anyway, too busy grading papers and pretending she didn't see kids sleeping in the back row. At exactly 10:30 a.m., a white catering truck pulled up with Morrison Catering Solutions, painted on the side in elegant gold script. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and started recording. 2 men in clean uniforms began loading box after box from our school kitchen. I recognized some of the items Mrs. Rodriguez had been prepping, fresh vegetables, whole chickens, real cheese wheels, cases of name-brand milk. The good stuff. The stuff we never saw in the lunch line. "Careful with the organic produce," one of the workers called out. "This is going to the country club event tomorrow." Organic produce. We were getting organic produce delivered to Lincoln High, and it was being redirected to some country club while we ate processed cheese squares that tasted like plastic. I filmed for 12 minutes before the truck pulled away, my phone's memory nearly maxed out. But I had something concrete now. Video evidence of food being removed from our kitchen and loaded into Morrison's personal catering truck. That afternoon, I made my first real mistake. I was so focused on gathering evidence that I didn't notice Morrison herself walking up behind me as I reviewed the footage in the library. Her reflection suddenly appeared in my phone screen, those cold blue eyes staring directly at what I was watching. "Interesting hobby you've developed, Mr. Chin." I nearly dropped the phone, fumbling to close the video app. I was just what? Making little movies. She slid into the chair across from me, her voice sugar-sweet but her eyes glacial. "You know, I've noticed you've been asking a lot of questions lately. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned you were curious about our food service operations." My blood turned to ice. Mrs. Rodriguez had promised not to say anything, but Morrison had obviously pressured her. The woman had grandchildren to feed, of course she'd cave when her job was threatened. "I was just wondering about the budget," I said weakly. Morrison's smile never wavered, but something predatory flickered behind it. "The budget is none of your concern. But your behavior lately, that is my concern. Wandering around during study hall, bothering kitchen staff, taking pictures of school property without permission. She leaned forward, lowering her voice so the librarian couldn't hear. Let me be very clear, Danny. You're already on thin ice after your little display in the cafeteria. Keep poking around where you don't belong, and you'll find yourself facing disciplinary action. Academic probation. Maybe even suspension. The threat hit home. I needed my grades to qualify for college scholarships. It was my only shot at escaping this place. Morrison knew exactly which pressure points to hit. Do we understand each other? Yes, ma'am, I whispered. Excellent. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. Oh, and Danny. I'd hate for your family's financial situation to become even more difficult. Your father's still job hunting, isn't he? Amazing how small this town is. How everyone talks to everyone. She walked away, leaving me sitting there with the full weight of what she just said. She wasn't just threatening me anymore. She was threatening my parents. But as I watched her disappear around the corner, something crystallized in my mind. Morrison had just confirmed everything. Her panic, her threats, her sudden interest in my activities, it all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. She was guilty as hell. And now she knew I was onto her. The weekend felt like the longest 48 hours of my life. Morrison's threats echoed in my head every time I tried to sleep, but underneath the fear, something else was growing, a cold, calculating anger that felt nothing like the hot shame from the cafeteria incident. Monday morning, I walked into school with a new plan. If Morrison wanted to play hardball, I'd show her what a kid with nothing left to lose could accomplish. My first stop was the guidance counselor's office. Mrs. Thompson had always been decent to me, and more importantly, she had access to records Morrison couldn't touch, federal documentation, district oversight files, things that came from outside Lincoln High's little kingdom. I'm researching college financial aid, I told her, which wasn't entirely a lie. I need to understand how federal funding works, especially for programs that help low-income students. Mrs. Thompson's face lit up. She loved it when students showed initiative about their futures, probably because it happens so rarely. Of course. What specifically are you looking for? Well, I know our school gets federal money for free lunch programs. I'm curious about how that's tracked and reported. You know, for my economics project on government assistance programs. 20 minutes later, I walked out with a stack of photocopied documents that made my heart race. Federal guidelines for the National School Lunch Program. Detailed requirements for fund allocation. And most importantly, the contact information for the regional USDA office that oversaw our district's compliance. According to the federal guidelines, schools had to maintain detailed records of every dollar spent, every meal served, every delivery received. They were required to submit quarterly reports showing exactly where the money went. And there were strict penalties for misappropriation of funds, including federal criminal charges. During lunch, I sat alone and pulled out my phone, dialing the USDA office before I could lose my nerve. Regional Food and Nutrition Service, this is Carol speaking. Hi, I'm a student at Lincoln High School, and I have some questions about lunch program oversight. Oh, that's unusual. Is this for a school project? Sort of. I took a deep breath. I think there might be some irregularities with how our program is being managed. Would it be possible to request records of what's supposed to be happening versus what actually is? There was a pause. Young man, are you saying you suspect fraud? The word fraud hung in the air like a loaded gun. Once I said yes, there would be no going back. Morrison would know someone had contacted federal authorities, and she'd know exactly who. Yes, ma'am. I think someone is stealing food that's meant for students. I see. Can you hold, please? The hold music felt like it lasted forever. When Carol came back, her tone was completely different, professional, focused, serious. I'm transferring you to our compliance division. What you're describing falls under federal criminal jurisdiction. Are you prepared to provide specific details and evidence? My mouth went dry. Yes, ma'am. Hold for Agent Martinez. Agent Martinez turned out to be a woman with a kind of voice that suggested she'd heard every lie and excuse in the book. She listened without interruption as I explained the catering truck, Morrison's threats, and the discrepancy between what food came in versus what students actually received. We'll need documentation, she said finally. Photos, delivery records, financial statements if you can access them. Can you safely obtain more evidence? I think so. Be very careful. If your principal is doing what you describe, she's looking at serious federal charges. People get desperate when they're cornered. After I hung up, I sat staring at my untouched lunch tray. 24 hours ago, Morrison had thought she'd scared me into silence. She had no idea that her threats had just turned a curious 17-year-old into a federal informant. But Agent Martinez's warning echoed in my head. People get desperate when they're cornered. And I was about to corner the most powerful person in my world. That evening, I made my second major mistake. I told Jake everything. We were in his basement playing Call of Duty, and the words just spilled out. The catering truck, the federal agent, Morrison's threats about my dad's job search. Jake listened with his mouth hanging open, occasionally pausing the game to stare at me like I'd grown a second head. Dude, you called the feds, he whispered, even though his parents were upstairs and couldn't hear us. On Principal Morrison. She's going to destroy you. She's already destroying me, I shot back. And every other kid on free lunch. Did you know she's probably stealing $50,000 a month? Maybe more. Jake whistled low. That's insane money. But Danny, man, what if you're wrong? What if there's some explanation? There's no explanation for threatening my family, I cut him off. She basically said she'd make sure my dad never gets hired anywhere in town. Which is exactly why you should drop this, Jake said, setting down his controller. Your parents don't know what you're doing, right? So just, stop. Delete the videos, tell the Fed guy you made a mistake, and let it go. But I couldn't let it go. Not when I kept thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez's face when she described throwing away enough food to feed 100 kids. Not when I remembered Morrison's voice echoing across the cafeteria, you should be grateful we even fed you at all. The next morning brought an unwelcome surprise. I was pulling books from my locker when Tyler Henderson appeared beside me, all 6 feet and 200 pounds of him, wearing his Letterman jacket like armor. Chen, right? His voice was friendly enough, but Tyler didn't talk to kids like me unless something was up. Heard you've been asking questions about lunch stuff. My stomach dropped. What? My mom works for the school district, Tyler continued casually. Accounting department. She mentioned Morrison's been asking around about some kid poking into food service records. Funny coincidence, right? The hallway suddenly felt too small. Tyler wasn't threatening me exactly, but the message was clear. Morrison had reached beyond the school walls, connections I hadn't considered. If Tyler's mom was feeding information back to her, how many other district employees were doing the same? I don't know what you're talking about, I mumbled, slamming my locker shut. Course you don't. Tyler's grin was razor sharp. Just thought you should know, my mom also mentioned how budget irregularities sometimes lead to staff cuts. Kitchen workers getting laid off, maintenance people losing hours. Shame when innocent people get caught up in unnecessary investigations, you know. He walked away whistling, leaving me standing there with the full weight of what I'd unleashed. This wasn't just about Morrison anymore. She was building a wall of collateral damage, making sure that if I brought her down, other people would suffer too. People like Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd already risked her job to help me. During third period, I got called to the office over the intercom. The entire class went, oh, like they were still in middle school, but my blood turned to ice water. Morrison never called students to her office unless they were in serious trouble. I walked those halls like a condemned man heading to execution. Mrs. Patterson looked up when I entered, her expression unreadable. Principal Morrison wants to see you, she said quietly. Go right in. Morrison's office smelled like vanilla candles and expensive coffee. She was sitting behind her mahogany desk, which probably cost more than my dad made in a month when he was working, reviewing what looked like personnel files. Sit down, Danny, she said without looking up. We need to have another conversation. I sat in the leather chair across from Morrison's desk, my hands gripping the armrests to keep them from shaking. She finished reading whatever file was in front of her, then slowly closed it and looked up at me with those cold blue eyes. I've been doing some research of my own, she said, sliding the folder toward me. Did you know that students who file false reports against school administrators can face academic penalties? Suspension, even expulsion. The folder had my name on it. Inside were printouts of my grades, attendance records, and a disciplinary form I'd never seen before, dated yesterday. According to the paperwork, I'd been caught disrupting kitchen operations and harassing staff members. This is fake, I said, my voice coming out stronger than I felt. I never. Mrs. Rodriguez signed it herself, Morrison interrupted. Poor woman was quite upset about your behavior. Said you'd been pressuring her to lie about our food service operations, making wild accusations about missing inventory. My heart sank. Mrs. Rodriguez had been forced to sign a false report, probably with her job held over her head like a sword. Morrison was systematically cutting off every ally I might have had. Of course, I believe in second chances, Morrison continued, leaning back in her chair. Academic discipline can be flexible when students demonstrate they've learned from their mistakes. The question is, what exactly have you learned, Danny? She was offering me an exit. Admit I was wrong, apologize for asking questions, and she'd make the disciplinary record disappear. All I had to do was betray everything I discovered and let her keep stealing from hungry kids. I've learned that you're scared, I said quietly. Morrison's pleasant expression flickered for just a moment. Excuse me. You're scared because you know what I found. The catering truck. Morrison Catering Solutions. The federal money that's supposed to feed kids like me, but somehow ends up at country club events instead. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Morrison's mask of professional concern vanished completely, replaced by something much more dangerous. You have no idea what you're playing with, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You think you're some kind of hero? You're a 17-year-old boy from a family that can't even afford groceries. Nobody will believe you over me. She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the parking lot where a familiar white catering truck was just pulling away from the loading dock. Even now, in the middle of our confrontation, she was still operating her scheme. I've been principal here for 8 years, Morrison said without turning around. I have relationships throughout this district, this town, this county. School board members attend my dinner parties. The mayor's wife uses my catering services. The police chief's son graduated from this school under my leadership. She turned back to me, and I saw something ugly in her expression, not just anger, but genuine hatred. You want to know what happens to poor kids who make trouble? Ask Marcus Williams. Graduated 2 years ago. Full scholarship to State University. Until academic irregularities were discovered in his transcripts. Amazing how quickly scholarship committees change their minds when principals express concerns about a student's character. The implication hit me like a physical blow. She'd destroyed someone else's future to make a point. Marcus Williams had been the valedictorian, the pride of Lincoln High's academic program. If Morrison could take down someone like that, someone with perfect grades and a full scholarship, what chance did I have? So here's what's going to happen, Morrison continued, returning to her desk. You're going to stop asking questions, stop making phone calls, and stop playing detective. And in return, I'll forget about this disciplinary report, your family will be left alone, and you might actually graduate from this school. She picked up her pen and held it out to me along with a written statement admitting I'd made false accusations against the school administration. Sign it, Danny. Last chance. I stared at the pen in Morrison's manicured hand, my mind racing through calculations. Marcus Williams, I remembered him now. Star student, perfect attendance, college-bound until suddenly he wasn't. The official story was that he cheated on his SATs, but Marcus was the kind of kid who could solve calculus problems in his sleep. It never made sense. Until now. You framed him, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Morrison's smile was razor-thin. I protected this school's reputation from a troublemaker. Just like I'm trying to protect it now. She waggled the pen at me. Sign, Danny. My hand reached for the pen, then stopped. Through the window, I could see students heading to fourth period lunch. Kids like Sarah Chen from my chemistry class, whose mom worked 3 jobs just like mine. Tommy Martinez, who sometimes fell asleep in English because he was helping his dad with construction work before school. Dozens of kids who depended on that free lunch program to get through the day. Morrison was stealing from all of them. And she'd keep stealing until someone stopped her. I pulled my hand back. No. The word hung in the air between us like a thrown gauntlet. Morrison's expression went from confident to incredulous to furious in the span of 3 seconds. No. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. You're choosing to destroy your family's future over cafeteria conspiracy theories. I'm choosing to do the right thing. Morrison slammed the pen down so hard it cracked. You stupid, arrogant little boy. You think the federal government cares about some nobody from Lincoln High? You think anyone will thank you for bringing chaos to this district? She grabbed her phone and dialed a number from memory. Tom. It's Patricia Morrison. Yes, I know you're busy, but I need a favor regarding the Henderson account. What? No, nothing like that. I just heard Danny Chen's father was interviewing for your parts specialist position. My blood turned to ice. She was calling someone about my dad's job interview, the one at Henderson Auto Parts that he'd been excited about all weekend. Well, I'd hate to interfere, Morrison continued, her eyes locked on mine, but I feel obligated to mention some concerns about family stability. Character issues. Yes, I'll send you the details. Of course, Tom. We have to look out for each other. She hung up and smiled at me like she just won the lottery. Your father won't be getting that job. Or the next one. Or the one after that. Amazing how word spreads in a town this size. The cruelty of it took my breath away. My dad had been so hopeful about Henderson Auto Parts. He'd bought a new shirt for the interview, the first new clothing he'd gotten in over a year. Now Morrison had destroyed that chance with a single phone call, and she was looking at me like it was my fault. This is what happens when you cross me, she said, picking up another file from her desk. And we're just getting started. Mrs. Rodriguez's employment review is coming up next month. Kitchen staff budgets are being reevaluated. Funny how many people's livelihoods depend on my recommendations. She was systematically targeting everyone who might support me, turning my investigation into a weapon against innocent people. But as she opened the new file, I caught a glimpse of letterhead that made my heart skip. Morrison Catering Solutions, Quarterly Revenue Report. The numbers I could see were staggering. $47,000 in the last 3 months alone. All of it federal money meant for feeding students, now flowing into Morrison's personal bank account. I had to get that file. I need to think about this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is a lot. Morrison's predatory smile widened. Of course it is. Take until tomorrow morning. But Danny, don't take too long. Every hour you wait, more people get hurt. I walked out of Morrison's office on unsteady legs, her threats echoing in my head. The hallways felt different now, like enemy territory where every adult could be working for her, every conversation could be about me. Tyler Henderson's warning about his mom in district accounting suddenly made perfect sense. Morrison had informants everywhere. But I'd seen that quarterly revenue report, even if just for a few seconds. $47,000 in 3 months. That meant she was stealing nearly $200,000 a year from the lunch program. Federal money. Money that could have fed every hungry kid in the district and still had plenty left over. During lunch, I sat at my usual table but couldn't touch my food. The cardboard pizza and bruised apple looked even more pathetic knowing that somewhere, Morrison was serving organic produce to country club members with money stolen from kids like me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Agent Martinez. Can you call me after school? Important update. I deleted the text immediately, paranoid that somehow Morrison could see it. But the fact that Agent Martinez was reaching out meant the federal investigation was moving forward. I wasn't alone in this anymore, even if it felt like it. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. During 7th period, Mrs. Patterson's voice crackled over the intercom. Danny Chen, please report to the main office. My stomach dropped. What now? But when I got there, Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely confused. I'm sorry, honey. Principal Morrison isn't here, and I didn't call for you. Maybe it was a mistake. Morrison had left early. Which meant she was either meeting with more people to turn against me, or the loading dock. If she was gone, this might be my only chance to get close to her office, maybe find more evidence. The quarterly revenue report had been sitting right there on her desk. I waited until Mrs. Patterson got distracted by a parent phone call, then slipped past her desk toward Morrison's office. The door was locked, but through the frosted glass window, I could see papers still scattered across her desk. Can I help you with something? I spun around to find Mr. Valdez, the head custodian, watching me with suspicious eyes. He'd always been friendly before, but now his expression was guarded. I was supposed to meet with Principal Morrison, I said weakly. She left 20 minutes ago. Said she wouldn't be back today. Mr. Valdez stepped closer. You know, Danny, Principal Morrison mentioned you've been asking a lot of questions lately. Making people uncomfortable. Another one. Morrison had gotten to him too. I was just curious about. Curiosity can be dangerous, Mr. Valdez interrupted. Especially when it affects other people's jobs. Mrs. Rodriguez has been very upset since your conversation. She's worried about her position here. The guilt hit me like a punch to the gut. Mrs. Rodriguez was suffering because I'd dragged her into this. Just like my dad was now going to lose job opportunities because of Morrison's phone calls. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, I said. Mr. Valdez's expression softened slightly. I know you didn't, kid. But sometimes good intentions cause bad consequences. Maybe it's time to let things go back to normal. He walked away, leaving me standing there with the weight of everyone's expectations crushing down on me. Morrison was a master manipulator, turning every decent person in the school into unwilling weapons against me. She'd made it so that pursuing the truth meant hurting innocent people. But as I headed for the exit, I passed the cafeteria and saw something that stopped me cold. A new poster by the lunch line, Food Service Appreciation Week, thanked Principal Morrison for her dedicated management of our nutrition programs. The audacity was breathtaking. She was actually celebrating herself for stealing from students. That's when I realized Morrison had made one crucial mistake. She thought I was fighting this alone. Time to prove her wrong. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I lied directly to my parents' faces. "How was school today, honey?" Mom asked, setting down a dinner of rice and canned vegetables. Dad was at the kitchen table reviewing job listings on his laptop, his face bearing that defeated expression that had become too familiar. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Actually, I got selected for this special academic project. I'll need to stay late some days this week to work on it." The lie came easier than I expected. Mom beamed with pride, her son, the academic achiever, getting special opportunities. If only she knew her special project son was actually building a federal case against his principal for stealing lunch money. "That's wonderful, Danny." Mom squeezed my shoulder. "What kind of project?" "Economic analysis," I said, which was technically true. "Studying how government programs work in real-world applications." Dad looked up from his laptop, and for a moment I thought he might ask more questions. Instead, he just nodded and went back to scrolling through job postings. I wondered if Henderson Auto Parts had already called to reject him, or if that phone call was still coming. After dinner, I retreated to my room and called Agent Martinez from the burner phone Jake had helped me buy with his lawn mowing money. The federal agent answered on the first ring. "Chen. I was hoping you'd call. We've made some progress on the Lincoln High situation." "What kind of progress?" "We pulled 3 years of federal lunch program disbursements to your district. Lincoln High has been receiving $52,000 monthly for free and reduced price meals. But according to the invoices we've subpoenaed, your actual food costs are running about $23,000 per month." I did the math quickly. That's almost $30,000 missing every month. "Exactly. Over 3 years, we're looking at potential fraud exceeding $1 million. Agent Martinez paused. "But we need internal documentation to prove where the money went. Bank records, invoices, anything that connects Morrison personally to the missing funds. Her catering company invoices are in her office. I saw them today. Can you safely access them?" I thought about Mr. Valdez's warning, Tyler Henderson's mother in district accounting, Morrison's web of informants throughout the school. "I don't know. She's got people watching me. Danny, I need you to understand something. What Morrison is doing, it's not just theft. It's a federal crime that carries a 20-year prison sentence. People who commit fraud at this level don't just steal money. They destroy evidence. They intimidate witnesses. They get dangerous when cornered." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you saying she might hurt someone?" "I'm saying be very, very careful. If you can get those documents, do it safely. But if you can't, we'll find another way." After hanging up, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through possibilities. Morrison's office was locked, but the school had security cameras everywhere. Even if I could somehow get in, there would be video evidence of me breaking into the principal's office. Unless... I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the Lincoln High website, navigating to the staff directory. Morrison had listed herself as Food Service Administrator, in addition to her principal duties. According to district policy, food service administrators had to file monthly reports with the central office. If Morrison was filing fake reports to cover her tracks, there would be copies in the district's main database. And unlike her locked office, the computer lab stayed open until 8 p.m. for students working on projects. I had told my parents I'd be staying late for academic work. Time to make that lie come true. The next afternoon, I headed straight for the computer lab after school. Mrs. Kim, the technology coordinator, barely looked up when I signed in. Working on that economics project, I told her, which was becoming my standard cover story. The district database required a student login, but I'd helped Mr. Peterson troubleshoot computer problems in his classroom enough times to know that teacher accounts had much broader access. And Mr. Peterson was notorious for using password 123 for everything. 20 minutes later, I was staring at 3 years of Morrison's monthly food service reports to the district office. The numbers were staggering in their brazenness. According to Morrison's official reports, Lincoln High was serving premium organic meals, purchasing fresh produce from local farms, and operating at optimal nutritional standards. The invoices showed purchases from Hartwell Organic Farms for $15,000 monthly, Mountain Valley Fresh Produce for $8,000, and Premium Protein Solutions for $12,000. But I knew for a fact we were eating cardboard pizza and processed cheese sauce. I cross-referenced the vendor names with online business directories. Hartwell Organic Farms had the same business address as Morrison Catering Solutions. So did Mountain Valley Fresh Produce. All 3 companies were registered to Patricia Morrison at her home address. She wasn't just skimming money from the lunch program. She had created an entire network of fake companies to systematically drain federal funds while filing fraudulent reports claiming students were receiving high-quality meals. My hands shook as I screenshot everything, uploading the files to a secure email account I'd created specifically for this investigation. Morrison had stolen over $1 million by creating phantom food companies and filing false reports about student nutrition. Find what you were looking for. I spun around so fast I nearly fell out of my chair. Morrison stood in the doorway of the computer lab, her face calm but her eyes absolutely murderous. Mrs. Kim was nowhere to be seen. The computer lab was completely empty except for Morrison and me, her heels clicking ominously on the tile floor as she approached my workstation. The screen still displayed her fraudulent reports, evidence of over $1 million in theft glowing bright against the dark lab. "You know, Danny, most students use the computer lab for homework," Morrison said, her voice deceptively casual. "Research papers, presentations, college applications. Normal teenage activities." I reached for the mouse to close the browser, but Morrison's hand clamped down on my wrist with surprising strength. "Don't." Her grip tightened. "I want to see exactly what my curious little student has discovered." She leaned over my shoulder, scanning the documents I'd pulled up. Her expensive perfume couldn't mask the tension radiating from her body as she read through her own fraudulent reports. "Hartwell Organic Farms," she read aloud. "Mountain Valley Fresh Produce. Premium Protein Solutions. Very thorough, Danny. Very concerning." Mrs. Kim will be back any minute, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Morrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Mrs. Kim left 20 minutes ago. I sent her home early, told her there was a gas leak in the east wing that needed immediate attention. Amazing how quickly the building empties when safety concerns arise. My blood turned to ice. We were alone in the school, and Morrison had planned it that way. You see, after our conversation yesterday, I realized you were more resourceful than I gave you credit for, Morrison continued, releasing my wrist to pace behind my chair. A normal teenager would have signed my statement and forgotten all about cafeteria conspiracies. But you're not normal, are you, Danny? She stopped directly behind me, her hands resting on the back of my chair. Federal agents have been making inquiries about Lincoln High's lunch program. Asking for records, requesting interviews with kitchen staff. Now why do you suppose that is? Agent Martinez had warned me this might happen, but hearing Morrison confirm it made my stomach drop. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Morrison spun my chair around so I was facing her. Just like you don't know anything about phone calls to the USDA compliance office. Or mysterious students asking very specific questions about food delivery schedules. She crouched down so we were at eye level, her blue eyes cold as winter. Here's what's going to happen next, Danny. You're going to delete everything you've accessed tonight. Then you're going to call your federal friends and tell them you made a mistake, that you misunderstood what you saw, that Principal Morrison runs an exemplary program. And if I don't? Morrison's smile was pure venom. Your father's interview at Henderson Auto Parts was just the beginning. By tomorrow morning, every potential employer in a 50-mile radius will know that the Chin family is problematic. Your mother's night cleaning job at Morrison Industries. My cousin owns that company. Such a shame when employee performance reviews turn negative. Morrison Industries. She had relatives throughout the local business community, connections I hadn't even considered. She could destroy both my parents' livelihoods with a handful of phone calls. But that's still not enough, is it? Morrison stood up, pulling out her phone. Mrs. Rodriguez has been so worried since your little conversation. Crying in the break room, terrified about losing her job. Her granddaughter Sophia is in kindergarten here, such a sweet child. It would be tragic if budget cuts forced us to eliminate her teacher's position. The scope of Morrison's reach was staggering. She wasn't just threatening me anymore, she was holding an entire web of innocent people hostage. Mrs. Rodriguez, Sophia's teacher, my parents, probably dozens of others I didn't even know about. You're insane, I whispered. I'm practical, Morrison corrected. I've built something here, Danny. A system that works. Do you really think anyone cares if some abstract federal money gets redirected? These people need jobs more than you need justice. She gestured around the empty computer lab, then out toward the dark hallways of Lincoln High. This school, this town, these families, they all depend on me. School board positions, district contracts, employment opportunities. I have influence that reaches into every corner of this community. You're one teenager with conspiracy theories. Who do you think people will believe when forced to choose? Morrison pulled up her contacts and showed me the screen. Names I recognized, school board members, local business owners, even the police chief she'd mentioned before. Last chance, Danny. Delete those files, make that phone call, and everyone you care about stays safe. Keep playing detective, and watch your whole world collapse. I stared at the computer screen showing Morrison's fraudulent reports, then at her phone displaying her network of local contacts. She had turned my investigation into a hostage situation where the truth itself had become a weapon pointed at innocent people. But as Morrison waited for my answer, I noticed something she'd missed in her threats and intimidation. The computer was still logged into the district database under Mr. Peterson's account. And according to the timestamp in the corner, our entire conversation had been recorded by the lab's automatic session monitoring system. Every word Morrison had just said, every threat, every admission, every detail about her fraudulent companies, was now stored in the district's digital archives. Okay, I said quietly. You win. But I was already calculating how long it would take Agent Martinez to subpoena those recordings. I deleted the files from the computer screen, my hands shaking as Morrison watched every keystroke. But what she couldn't see was the tiny recording app I'd activated on my phone the moment she walked into the lab, Jake's suggestion after watching too many spy movies. Every threat, every admission about her fake companies, every detail about her network of local contacts was now stored on my device. Smart choice, Morrison said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Now make the call. I pulled out my phone, pretending to scroll through contacts while actually stopping the recording and uploading it to the same secure email where I'd stored the financial documents. Morrison was standing too close to see exactly what I was doing, focused on making sure I followed through. Agent Martinez. I said when the call connected. This is Danny Chen. I need to tell you I made a mistake. Morrison's smile widened as I delivered the scripted lies she demanded. Yes, I'd misunderstood what I saw. No, there was no evidence of wrongdoing. Principal Morrison ran an exemplary program and I was sorry for wasting federal resources on teenage conspiracy theories. Are you certain about this, son? Agent Martinez's voice carried a note of concern. Because once we close this investigation. I'm certain, I interrupted, hoping she could hear the strain in my voice. I was wrong about everything. After hanging up, Morrison patted my shoulder like I was a well-trained dog. See how easy that was? Now everyone can go back to their normal lives without unnecessary drama. She walked me out of the computer lab, her heels echoing through the empty hallways. Oh, and Danny. I'll be monitoring your activities very closely from now on. Any more federal phone calls, any more questions about food service, any more late-night research projects, and our previous conversation about consequences will seem friendly by comparison. Morrison left me at the main entrance, driving away in her silver BMW while I stood on the sidewalk trying to process what had just happened. She thought she'd won, thought she'd scared me into permanent silence. But the recording on my phone contained enough evidence to bury her career and send her to federal prison. The problem was figuring out how to use it without destroying everyone she threatened. I walked home through the October darkness, my mind racing through possibilities. Morrison had made one crucial error in her intimidation tactics. She'd revealed the full scope of her local network while assuming I had no way to document it. Her cousin at Morrison Industries, her connections to the school board, her influence over local employment decisions. It was all on the recording now, a complete map of her corruption network. But she also made it clear that using that evidence would trigger a cascade of retaliation against innocent people. Mrs. Rodriguez would lose her job. Sophia's kindergarten teacher would be eliminated in budget cuts. My parents would become unemployable in our small town. When I got home, Mom and Dad were watching TV on our ancient couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn that probably constituted their dinner. They looked up when I walked in, faces bright with interest about my special academic project. "How did it go tonight, honey?" Mom asked. "Good," I lied, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Really productive." Dad muted the TV. "You know, I heard back from Henderson Auto Parts today. Didn't get the position." His voice carried forced casualness, but I could see the disappointment etched in the lines around his eyes. Manager said they decided to go with someone with more experience. Morrison's phone call had already cost him the job, just as she promised. And this was only the beginning of what she could do to my family. "I'm sorry, Dad. Not your fault, son. Something better will come along." But as I headed to my room, I knew nothing better would come along. Not as long as Morrison controlled the local employment network. She made my parents economic prisoners in their own town, and the only key to their freedom was evidence I couldn't use without making their situation even worse. I sat at my desk, staring at my phone where Morrison's recorded confession waited like a loaded weapon. Agent Martinez had given me her direct number for emergencies, and this qualified. The recording proved federal fraud, criminal conspiracy, and witness intimidation. It was everything the FBI needed to build an airtight case. But using it would be like detonating a bomb in my own life. That night, I lay awake until 3 a.m. staring at my phone, Morrison's voice echoing in my head. "I have influence that reaches into every corner of this community." But as her threats replayed on an endless loop, something else began nagging at me. A detail that didn't quite fit. Morrison Industries, the company where my mom worked her night cleaning job. Morrison had claimed her cousin owned it, but I'd seen the business registration documents during my database search. Morrison Industries was founded in 1987 by Robert Morrison, who had died in 2019. The current owner was listed as Patricia Morrison herself. She didn't just have a cousin at my mom's workplace. She owned the entire company. Which meant Morrison had been planning this intimidation campaign long before I ever asked questions about the lunch program. She'd systematically positioned herself to control the economic lives of families like mine, creating a web of dependency that made resistance nearly impossible. But it also meant she was lying about other things too. The next morning, I arrived at school early and positioned myself near the administrative offices. I needed to see who Morrison talked to, how her network actually operated. At 7:15 a.m. sharp, Tyler Henderson's mother walked into the building carrying a briefcase marked District Accounting. She went straight to Morrison's office without checking in with Mrs. Patterson. 20 minutes later, she emerged carrying a different briefcase, unmarked, but noticeably heavier. Through the frosted glass of Morrison's office window, I could see Morrison putting documents into her desk safe, the same safe where she probably stored the quarterly revenue reports. Tyler's mom wasn't just feeding information to Morrison. She was actively participating in the document shuffling. During first period, I got a text from Jake, emergency. Meet me in the east parking lot before lunch. When I found him by his beat-up Honda, Jake looked like he hadn't slept. "Dude, we have a problem. My mom heard about your federal investigation." My stomach dropped. "How?" "School board meeting last night. Apparently Morrison told them some kid had been making frivolous harassment calls to federal agencies about the lunch program. She didn't name you specifically, but..." Jake ran his hands through his hair. "My mom's on the board, Danny. She came home talking about how concerned Morrison was about unfounded accusations damaging district reputation." "What exactly did Morrison tell them?" "That's the thing, my mom said Morrison seemed really rattled. Like, sweating and stammering rattled. And when board member Patricia Chin asked for documentation proving the accusations were unfounded, Morrison couldn't produce anything." My heart skipped. "Patricia Chin. Any relation to..." "Your mom's maiden name," Jake finished. I looked it up in the old yearbooks. Patricia Chin graduated Lincoln High in 1983, same year as your mom. They were friends. A school board member who knew my family. Someone Morrison couldn't completely control through her usual intimidation tactics. But before I could process this fully, Jake grabbed my arm. "There's more. My mom said Morrison requested an emergency audit of all federal lunch program records. She wants to prove beyond doubt that everything's legitimate. An audit meant Morrison was destroying evidence right now, making sure the fake vendor invoices disappeared before federal investigators could find them. But it also meant she was panicking, making desperate moves that might create new opportunities." "When's the audit happening?" "Monday morning. District officials, federal compliance officers, the whole 9 yards." Jake's expression was grim. "Danny, if Morrison's really stealing money like you think, she's going to make sure every trace of it vanishes this weekend." As Jake drove away, I realized Morrison had just made her biggest mistake yet. By calling for an audit, she created a ticking clock. She had exactly 4 days to clean up 3 years of federal fraud. Which meant the next 4 days were my only chance to stop her. That weekend, I became a ghost in my own town. While Morrison worked to destroy evidence before Monday's audit, I started building my own investigation from the outside. Saturday morning, I rode my bike to the county courthouse and requested public records from Morrison Catering Solutions. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Foster, handed me a thick folder that made my hands shake. Morrison had incorporated her catering business 3 years ago, exactly when the lunch program thefts began. But according to the state licensing documents, Morrison Catering Solutions had never obtained proper food service permits. She'd been operating an unlicensed catering company using food purchased with federal dollars meant for student meals. "Doing a school project?" Mrs. Foster asked, noticing my age. "Something like that," I said, photographing every document. The business registration listed Morrison's home address, but also showed a secondary location, a warehouse on Industrial Drive that belonged to Premium Food Storage LLC. Another company owned by Patricia Morrison, created 6 months after the catering business. I biked across town to Industrial Drive, a strip of warehouses and loading docks on the outskirts of Lincoln. Number 847 was a nondescript metal building with Morrison Catering Solutions painted on the side door. Through the windows, I could see commercial refrigeration units, professional cooking equipment, and cases of food products. Morrison wasn't just stealing lunch money, she'd built an entire shadow food service operation using federal funds. But what made my blood run cold was the parking lot. 3 vehicles, Morrison's silver BMW, Tyler Henderson's mom's Subaru, and a white pickup truck registered to Robert Valdez according to the license plate lookup app Jake had shown me. Mr. Valdez, the custodian who'd warned me about asking too many questions, was here on a Saturday helping Morrison move evidence. I positioned myself behind a dumpster across the street and started recording. For 2 hours, I watched them load boxes into trucks, haul equipment into storage units, and shred documents by the bagful. Tyler's mom carried out 3 computers and loaded them into her Subaru. Mr. Valdez wheeled out an industrial shredder that looked like it had been working overtime. Morrison emerged from the warehouse carrying a metal lockbox and a briefcase. Even from a distance, I could see the stress in her movements, quick, jerky gestures that spoke of barely controlled panic. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Martinez. "Danny, I'm concerned about your call yesterday. If you're under duress, use the code phrase Lincoln Eagle in any communication." I'd forgotten about the safety protocol she'd mentioned during our first conversation. But seeing Morrison's evidence destruction operation in real time, I knew I couldn't wait until Monday's audit. By then, there would be nothing left to find. I typed back, Lincoln Eagle. Morrison destroying evidence at 847 Industrial Drive. Active operation in progress. The response came within minutes, federal agents en route. Do not approach. Maintain safe distance and document what you can. 30 minutes later, 2 black SUVs pulled into the warehouse parking lot. Morrison's face went white as Agent Martinez stepped out with 3 other federal agents, search warrant already in hand. From my hiding spot, I watched Morrison's 3-year scheme collapse in real time. The fake companies, the fraudulent reports, the stolen lunch money, it was all about to come crashing down. But as the agents began confiscating evidence, Tyler's mom caught sight of me across the street. She said something to Morrison, who turned and stared directly at my location with pure hatred in her eyes. Even caught red-handed, Morrison was still calculating her revenge. The federal raid on Morrison's warehouse was just the beginning. By Tuesday morning, the story had exploded across local media, Lincoln High principal arrested for $1.2 million federal fraud scheme. The number was even higher than I'd calculated. Agent Martinez later told me Morrison had been stealing for nearly 4 years, not 3. But the real satisfaction came Wednesday morning when I walked into school to find everything changed. Morrison's office stood empty, her nameplate already removed. Mrs. Patterson had been replaced by a federal monitor overseeing all administrative functions. And in the cafeteria, for the first time in years, we were served actual food. Real pizza with genuine cheese. Fresh fruit that wasn't bruised. Vegetables that had color and texture. Mrs. Rodriguez stood behind the serving line with tears in her eyes, finally able to give students the meals the federal program had always intended to provide. "Take as much as you want, Mijo," she whispered when I reached her station. "We have plenty now." The lunch line moved differently too. No more anxious glances toward the principal's office. No more shame about being on the free meal program. Kids were actually smiling, actually enjoying their food instead of choking down processed garbage while Morrison profited from their hunger. During 4th period, I got called to the office one last time. But instead of Morrison's intimidation chamber, I found Agent Martinez waiting with a woman I didn't recognize, tall, African-American, wearing a professional suit that somehow managed to look both authoritative and kind. "Danny, this is Dr. Williams," Agent Martinez said. "She's the interim principal the district appointed this morning." Dr. Williams stood and shook my hand with genuine respect. "Mr. Chen, I wanted to thank you personally. What you uncovered wasn't just theft, it was a systematic betrayal of the most vulnerable students in our district." "What's going to happen to Morrison?" I asked. Agent Martinez smiled grimly. "Patricia Morrison is facing federal charges for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, witness intimidation, and violation of federal nutrition program regulations. She's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Tyler Henderson's mother and Mr. Valdez. Conspiracy charges. They'll serve time too, though probably less than Morrison since they cooperated once we offered plea deals." Dr. Williams opened a folder on the desk. "But I wanted to discuss something else with you, Danny. The district is implementing new oversight procedures for all federal programs, and we need student representatives on the monitoring committee. Your demonstrated commitment to accountability and student welfare makes you an obvious choice." She slid an official letter across the desk. "Student advisory position, Federal Program Oversight Committee." It came with a small monthly stipend, not much, but enough to help my family with groceries. "There's also this," Agent Martinez added, handing me another document. "The federal government offers rewards for reporting fraud that recovers significant taxpayer money. Your investigation led to the recovery of over $800,000 in stolen funds. The reward amount made my eyes go wide, $25,000. Enough to cover my college application fees, SAT prep courses, maybe even a semester of tuition somewhere. Money Morrison had stolen from kids like me, now being returned to help secure my future." But the best moment came that Friday in the cafeteria. I was eating lunch, real food, as much as I wanted, when Sophia Rodriguez, Mrs. Rodriguez's kindergarten granddaughter, ran up to my table. "Are you the boy who saved our lunch?" she asked in that direct way only 5-year-olds can manage. Before I could answer, she wrapped her tiny arms around my neck in a fierce hug. "Abuela says you're a hero. She says now all the kids get to eat good food." As Sophia skipped back to the elementary section, I realized Morrison had been wrong about everything. She thought people would choose economic security over doing the right thing. She thought her web of intimidation and control made her untouchable. But she underestimated the power of truth, the courage of ordinary people like Mrs. Rodriguez and Agent Martinez, and the simple fact that sometimes a 17-year-old with nothing left to lose can bring down an empire built on cruelty. Principal Morrison had said I should be grateful they fed me at all. Now she could be grateful for 3 meals a day in federal prison. Justice served.